Our first app is nice, but it doesn't really do anything yet. Let's add a button to the screen that we can tap to get an answer to our question.
Let's continue with our crystal ball project in Eclipse. Before we do anything though, let's see how to start our emulator ahead of time so we don't have to wait for it to boot up when we're ready to test. If your emulator is already running, then go ahead and just watch this part. Otherwise, follow along to let it boot while we add our button. Up here in the toolbar at the top of Eclipse, you'll notice two icons with the Android robot. The first launches the SDK Manager, which we can use to download and install Android platforms like the one that is already included in this bundle. There are also some other supplementary tools available here. The second button is for the AVD Manager. Click on it. This is what we use to manage our emulators, or Android virtual devices. There should be one AVD listed like this. Highlight it, and then click on the Edit button at the right. Here we can change the configuration of our emulator. Click Cancel, and now click on the Start button. We're given a few options for how our emulator will look and run. Check the box that says Scale Display to Real Size. Chances are the first time you ran your emulator, it was probably much larger than an actual phone, and may have even looked too big for your screen. You'll have to see which setting works best for your computer because it will depend on your monitor. I'm going to uncheck the box and click Launch. The emulator will launch in a separate window, so we can close the AVD Manager. Back in Eclipse, make sure that the activity main.xml file is open. Remember from before that the layouts are stored in the Resources, or Res directory, with other resources that you see or hear in the app. So now we have from before a label that says the answer is yes, but let's delete it. Right-click on it, and select Delete. We'll create a new one so we can learn how to add labels to our screen. On the left side of the graphical layout editor, we find the palette. This has all sorts of Android controls that we can drag and drop onto the screen. The first section, Form Widgets, has commonly used form elements like labels, buttons, and checkboxes. Everything here in the palette is a type of view. Now, a view in the Android sense of the word is a rectangular area on the screen that we can see and interact with. These items in the palette are all specialized types of views, kind of like how a motorcycle is a specialized type of vehicle. In Android, the name for a label is text view, because a label is a view for displaying stylized text. Find the text view in the upper left here, and then click on it and drag it into the screen. Moving the text view around, we see green arrows, dotted lines, and borders that change depending on where we move. This is because the text view will be placed relative to different areas of the screen. We want ours to be right in the middle, so move it until we see horizontal and vertical dotted lines like this. Or you can drop it wherever you like and use the vertical and horizontal centering buttons. Let's change the text by right-clicking on the word Text View and then selecting Edit Text. In this case, we don't want the text view to display anything until after we've asked a question and tapped on the button to get an answer. So click on the Clear button at the bottom, and notice that our text view is still here, as we can see over here in the outline, but now it's blank. Below the outline here is the Properties view. This lists all the different properties available for our text view. Our sample text was a little small for the screen, so let's change the text size property. Scroll down and find the property called Text Size. Then click on the box next to it and type 32SP. There is an issue in Eclipse on the Mac Mountain Lion operating system that doesn't allow us to change this setting in the Properties window, so let's look at another way to do it. Right-click on the text view in the outline and select Edit Text Size. Type 32SP and click OK. The SP stands for Scale Independent Pixels, and it's a relative unit that helps our text look the same on devices with different screen sizes and pixel densities, like regular versus HD screens. SP values like this also take into consideration a user's preferences for font sizes. When we're setting the font size for text in Android, we always want to use SP units just like this. Okay, see if you can figure out how to drag a button onto the screen and center it horizontally below the text view. Go ahead and pause. I'll wait. Good. Okay, my turn. I'm going to drag a button onto the screen and then line it up below our text view, which I can see here with the faint yellow box around it. Okay, now let's click on the Fill Width button up here at the top, which has two arrows pointing to the sides. This makes our button expand all the way to the sides of our view. and we should probably change the word button to something else. So right-click on it and select Edit Text again. In the box at the bottom, let's type something more descriptive, like Enlighten Me. And then click on OK. Again, notice that our change shows up here in the screen. All right, cool. Well, it may not be pretty yet, but there's the basic structure for our screen. Let's do one more thing here before we make the button actually do something. Let's switch to the XML view for a moment by clicking on the Activity Main.xml tab at the bottom. Notice that we have an XML element called Text View here on line 6, and this represents our blank text view. And here on line 15, we have a Button XML element that represents our button. When we drag and drop a view onto the screen in the graphical layout editor, this is the kind of XML that gets produced to represent it. We could have typed this all out just like this instead of dragging and dropping. Take a look at line 7 and line 16. We can see that some IDs were added to our code. We'll need these IDs when we're writing code, because that's what we'll use to refer to these views from within the code. These generic IDs are acceptable, and we'll use them for now, but it's a good practice to give them more descriptive names, which helps when you have more than one text view or more than one button or whatever on the screen. And just a quick heads up, if we were to change the ID for the text view on line 7, we'd also have to change it down here on line 19. We placed our button directly below the text view, and because this is a relative layout, where elements are placed relative to each other, the button is placed relative to this text view, and it's linked through its ID. We can change these IDs here or on the Graphical Layout tab like when we change the text. Speaking of text, look at line 21. This is the text that we typed on our button. Let's save our changes and run our project again to make sure that everything looks okay on the emulator. Click on the Run button at the top, and after a few moments, our app should load on the emulator. Notice down here in the console view that Eclipse is logging all the steps it's taking to run our app on the emulator. Once it's loaded, it switches over to the Logcat view. So if I switch back to the emulator and unlock it, we see our app. All right, we're looking good. It doesn't really do much, but notice that we can tap on our button.
We made a lot of changes here, so let's just take a short break to review them before moving on to the code. We started out by learning a little bit about working with the Android emulator, and then we added some views to our screen layout. We added a text view to display our answer, and a button to tap to get an answer. Coming up next, we'll add some code to that button so that it actually does something.